Today, we become legends.
Smite 2's first alpha weekend was an absolute blast, and one of my favourite aspects of it were the tweaks and minor reworks to god kits as they made the transition to Smite 2. So here's my ideas for 10 gods that I would give similar changes for as they get added to Smite 2 in the future. The ideas get more and more unhinged as the video goes on, so be sure to stick around until the end where I basically lose my mind and go hog wild on these ideas. Let's take a look at my first one. So first up, I have a rework for Surtur's ultimate. Surtur ascends to giant form, gaining increased protections, movement speed, and slow immunity. During this time, Surtur's Flames of Muspel, his 1, has a 1 second cooldown regardless of any cooldown rate or other effects, and his passive is uncapped. So this is one of the more crazy changes I'll have for the video, as I'm aiming for these ideas to be more in line with what we've seen from Smite 2's alpha so far and not complete kit reworks. Though do let me know if that's a video you want to see also. I think there are plenty of gods from Smite 1 that could use a full kit rework going into Smite 2. But that's not what this particular video is going to be about. The thought process behind this change is that Surtur's base kit is incredibly synergistic and well designed in my opinion. It feels amazing to use and has a unique playstyle. His ultimate, however, feels like it was plucked from an entirely different god design and does not fit with his W key pressure playstyle at all. You're diving in, smacking people up, sticking to them with your 3, stacking your 1, and then you just take yourself completely out of the fight for several seconds for mediocre payoff. Sure, you could use the ultimate as an engage, but it's so slow that often doesn't work anyway. Sure, you could adjust the landing and or charge up time of the ability to help the issue of it interrupting Surtur's flow and maybe make it a better engage, but honestly, I think it would be better to just rework the ult entirely into something that's pressure based and doesn't take Surtur out of the fight. Because the entire rest of his kit is all about staying in people's faces for long periods of time to stack his 1, get value from his passive, lock people down into the 3, etc. This ult design I came up with doesn't have to be exactly what's done with Surtur. You could also just go with a burst CC option or something similar, but I like the idea of giving him a steroid ultimate that enhances his already fun and powerful base kit by making his 1 incredibly powerful and uncapping his passive so he can heal like an absolute machine. Sure, this does sort of give Vamana vibes a little bit, but I think it will be a lot more interactive and less frustrating than Vamana's left-click W playstyle during his ult, and would make Surtur a truly great warrior design. Okay, next up we have a simple one that I won't spend too much time on. Bring back the turtle knockup for Eren Shen. With Smite 2 making a clear stance on god and role flexibility being a key point, I see no issue with allowing Eren Shen to be a dominant jungler rather than a solo laner in Smite 2, which was the main reason this change was even made in the first place. They absolutely hated warrior jungles in Smite 1, but it seems there's a shift in direction for Smite 2 towards more flexibility, and that is extremely welcome. You could either completely revert the rework or just return the knockup and balance the other effects in Erlang's kit if you want to. How it's done is something that can be ironed out by the balance team, but I think it's about time for Eren Shen to return to his former glory. Next up, Awilix can now cast Moonlight Charge directly from Suku. So this is another simple one that would just make Awilix feel a lot better to play overall. At the moment, if you're mounted on Suku, you have to cancel the ability and then use the 3, which can be a bit clunky at times. I propose we just let Awilix use the 3 from mounted state directly, which would have a custom animation of Suku turning into the projectile and not trigger the cooldown of her 1, just as if you right-click dismounted. It's nothing groundbreaking, but would definitely make Awilix feel a lot better to use in Smite 2. Next up, a new aspect to King Arthur's passive. At 85 energy or higher, King Arthur now passively gains an effect that heals him 2% max health and mana when hitting an enemy god with an ability once per ability. This effect persists for 5 seconds after using Excalibur's Wrath. So this one is much less crazy and definitely falls in line with tweaks such as Nis reworked weave mechanics or Ymir's Ice Wall knockup. Ever since the removal of the original Glad Shield effect, Arthur hasn't really felt like the same god, and I think bringing that effect back but in a limited form will be just what he needs. Doing it this way gives the player a valuable trade-off and decision to make rather than just mindlessly rushing an item and face rolling your keyboard. Is it worth it to hold on to your ultimate to ensure you keep getting those max health heals on abilities, or do you let the ult rip for huge damage potential but lose that healing until you can build up another bar of energy? There might be some people still traumatized by Arthur's dominance during the old Glad Shield era, but this is a much more restrictive version of the effect that I think provides a valuable trade-off to the Arthur player and would make him feel a whole lot better to play overall. Next up, some tweaks to Hades. Shroud of Darkness and Death from Below would now spawn spirit minions which attack enemies for minor damage and last 3 seconds. These spirit minions can be detonated by Devour Souls. So this is a change I've been throwing around for a while as somewhat of a fix to the extremely polarizing playstyle of Hades. The issue here lies in the fact that Devour Souls relies on nearby minions to do any form of significant damage, which leads to it being completely and utterly broken for the laning phase to the point where Hades is nigh on unbeatable there. But when it comes to teamfights, fights, you can't ever get enough targets for Devour Souls to do anything meaningful. Adding these spirit minions that would work in a similar way to Cerberus 3 would allow Hades to retain some of that scary burst damage from Devour Souls in teamfights, and at that point you can nerf the overall damage and or healing to make it less oppressive in lane. I'm all for certain gods having clear strengths and weaknesses, but sometimes it goes a little too far, and I believe Hades is one of those cases, as he's completely unstoppable and unfun in the laning phase, but sort of does nothing in late game teamfights. I think these changes will be a great way to fix that. Next up, a new ultimate for Arachne, Web Tunnels. Arachne can create webbed tunnels on terrain walls similar to Janus portals by channeling for 3 seconds next to the wall. Once opened, these tunnels remain open for several minutes and can only be used by Arachne, but with a short wind-up animation to enter them similar to Cleaner's wall entry, and a short cooldown on using another one right after. So I will admit this is probably the change I'm most unsure about in the entire video, but I really like the core idea. It harkens back a little bit to Arachne's old design where her egg pods gave her the potential to jungle better than any other god in the game with careful setup and planning. This will be similar, as you have to be smart about when and where you set up your web tunnels and get a network going, but they could give her unparalleled control over traversing the jungle. There would still be counterplay to these, as they would take a while to open and to enter, plus they could be sniffed out and warded to track Arachne as she uses them, and maybe even set up an ambush on one side of the tunnel to catch her out when she comes through. This will be extremely wacky to play with and might have some issues of being a bit useless late game, so perhaps you could even give her this ability in addition to either her current ultimate or a different, more active ultimate that she can actually use in fights. But I really like the core idea here, and I think it fits perfectly for Arachne. Next up, some tweaks to Fafnir's dragon form. I think you could drastically shorten the transform and detransform times and allow Fafnir to stay in dragon form for as long as he likes, but with some form of limitation. This could be draining health over time or gold over time, though that might be a bit crazy, especially the gold one. Or you could just scale the cooldown based on how long he was in dragon form the previous time. Depending on the implementation, there might still need to be some kind of limit on how long he can stay in dragon form, but I think allowing him more free access and control over this will be a great way to make him feel more fun. Fafnir's base kit is just so incredibly boring and weak, and while you of course can't let him be in dragon form permanently, I think allowing him a faster way in and out of it, and either a health drain over time effect, a resource bar to where he can only cast a certain number of abilities before returning to dwarf form, or a simpler implementation of just increasing the upper limit to say 5 minutes, but scaling the cooldown depending on how long he stays transformed, will be really cool for him in my opinion. This is one of the more crazy changes on the list, and I don't have an exact idea of how it should be implemented, but I feel like given Fafnir's extremely low play rate, he does need something crazy to spice up his gameplay for Smite 2. Next up, another insane one, this time for Nox. Allow her to cast her 1 and 2 while inside an ally from her 3, perhaps with some limitations. So this change is a bit crazy, and while I do think a more substantial rework for Nox going into Smite 2 might be a better way to approach her, this video is more focused on minor changes or single ability reworks as we've seen so far in Smite 2, rather than fully reworking gods. You might need to adjust Nox's combo in some other way for this to work, but I really love the idea of Nox being able to sort of attach herself to an ally with her 3 and cast her combo from, for example, inside your soul laner or jungler that's diving the backline. This could be very frustrating to deal with, so it could maybe have a few seconds longer cooldown if used from inside an ally, or she pays some health to do so. Or if you want it to be really crazy, you could make her 2 a pseudo silence instead of a full one, where the enemy takes major damage if they cast an ability in her 2, but they can still cast abilities. At that point, you could maybe make her 2 larger to compensate. You could even lean into her supportive aspects and give extra protections and or a heal over time to the ally she's inside, but that's sort of going down the road of more major changes. For this video, I just really like the idea of her being able to cast her combo from inside an ally, with appropriate changes to keep it balanced, like an increased cooldown or health cost of course. Next up, completely new Acons for Ratosa, maybe with similar themes and possibly taking from old original Acons, but make them all active items. So this is a pretty simple one. With Smite 2's active item system, I think it will be really cool to make all 4 of Rat's Acons have an active effect. They could have passive effects too if you wanted to go that route, but I think having them as actives will be a really cool showcase of how crazy the new item system can be. I also wouldn't mind a mix of strength-based and int-based Acons, maybe 1 strength-based damage Acon, 1 int-based damaged Acon, 1 strength-based tank Acon, and 1 int-based tank Acon. You could also pull from some design space of Rat's original ones, like maybe allowing the Opal Acon effect of lightning bolts on his dash that could proc on hit effects, but make it an active item that only lasts like 5 to 10 seconds to balance it out. An int-based healing Acon that has a similar passive effect to his current green Acon, but also an active that doubles the healing from the passive effect for a limited time and converts converts excess healing to a shield. I don't know, I don't have specific ideas drawn up here, but I feel like the new item system opens up so many opportunities for cool reworked acorns between strength versus int and having an active effect on each one. It would be really cool to see what the team might come up with for Rat in Smite 2. Alright, and finally, let's close it out with probably the craziest change of the video, this time for Scatty. So my proposal here is that you move everything from Scatty's 2 onto the passive, and it will now grant an active item that takes up a build slot and is now the way you control Calder. The item will be upgradable in at least 2 ways, perhaps up to 4, that would act similar to Rat's acorns and enhance Calder in unique ways depending on which upgrade you chose. You could then replace Scatty's 2 with a more active ability of some kind, no real ideas on what that could be though. Okay, so this one is probably the craziest change of the video and verges on major rework status, but Scatty is one of the gods that I do think needs major changes going into Smite 2. Much like Rat's acorns, I think the active item system will be a great avenue to free up Scatty's kit and make Calder much more synergistic and interesting with the different upgrade paths her active item could have. The sky's the limit really on how crazy you want to get with the effects it could give. You could do more simple stuff like Calder heals Scatty on hit, or Calder can proc item effects, or you could go hog wild and do something like Calder splits into 3 smaller wolves that each do 40% damage, or Calder actively roams the map where he can act as a ward and maybe even take jungle camps. I don't know, I'm kind of going off the deep end here and you probably shouldn't get that crazy with these effects, but I think a system like this where Scatty gets an inherent active item to control Calder that could be upgraded would be really cool, and lean into the pet aspect of her even more. There might be a slight issue with this though, especially on console, as constantly having to press an active item button to control Calder rather than a normal ability button will probably be very hard to get used to, and rebinding it just for Scatty would be equally cumbersome. So if that wouldn't work, you could just keep Scatty's 2 as normal for controlling Calder and make her unique item passive instead, but with similar upgrades. But that's all I've got for 10 changes or reworks I'd make to gods going into Smite 2. Which one of these was your favourite? Or have you got any ideas of your own for similar changes? Let me know down below and I'll catch you guys in another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.